Hello, this is Morel Bernard with the continuation of the story Silver Fleece. Last words were, that must be beautiful, sighed Mrs. Taylor wistfully, sinking to the ground and clasping her hands about her knees. And by the way, please subscribe to the channel for more storytelling, and please share the videos for more storytelling. So I will continue with the story. Yes, Mom, but it's prettiest when the balls come and swell and burst and the cotton covers the feel like foam, all misty. She bent, wandering over the pale plants. The poetry of the thing began to sing within her, awakening her unpoetic imagination, and she murmured, "The golden fleece. It's the silver fleece." He hearkened. "What's that?" he asked. "Have you never heard of the golden fleece, Bless?" "No, Ma'am," he said eagerly. Then glancing up toward the Cresswell fields, he saw two white men watching them. He grasped his hoe and started briskly to work. "Sometime you'll tell me, please, won't you?" She glanced at her watch in surprise and arose hastily. "Yes, with pleasure," she said, moving away, at first very fast, and then more and more slowly up the lane, with a puzzled look on her face. She began to realize that in this pleasant little chat, the fact of the boy's colour had quite escaped her. And what especially puzzled her was that this had not happened before. She had been here 4 months, and yet every moment up to now she seemed to have been vividly, almost painfully conscious that she was a white woman talking to black folk. Now, for one little half hour, she had been a woman talking to a boy. No, not even that. She had been talking, just talking. There were no persons in the conversation, just things, one thing. Cotton. She started thinking of cotton, but at once she pulled herself back to the other aspect. Always before she had been veiled from these folk who had put the veil there. Had she herself hung it before her soul, or had they hidden timidly behind its other side? Or was it simply a brute fact, regardless of both of them? The longer she thought, the more bewildered she grew. There seemed no analogy that she knew. Here was a unique thing, and she climbed to her bedroom and stared at the stars. John Taylor had written to his sister. He wanted information, very definite information about Toombs County cotton, about its stores, its people, especially its people. He propounded a dozen questions, sharp, searching questions, and he wanted the answers tomorrow. Impossible, thought Miss Taylor. He had calculated on her getting this letter yesterday, forgetting that their mail was fetched once a day from the town 4 miles away. Then, too, she did not know all these matters and knew no one who did. Did John think she had nothing else to do? And sighing at the thought of tomorrow's drudgery, she determined to consult Miss Smith in the morning. Miss Smith suggested a drive to town. Bless could take her in the top buggy after school, and she could consult some of the merchants and businessmen. She could then write her letter and mail it there. It would be but a day or so late getting to New York. "Of course," said Miss Smith dryly, slowly folding her napkin. "Of course, the only people here are the Cresswells." "Oh, yes," said Miss Taylor invitedly. There was an allurement about this all-pervasive name. It held her by a growing fascination, and she was anxious for the older woman to amplify. Miss Smith, however, remained provokingly silent, so Miss Taylor essayed further. "What sort of people are the Cresswells?" she asked. "The old man's a fool, the young one a rascal, the girl a ninny," was Miss Smith's succinct and acid classification of the county's first family, adding, as she rose, "but they own us body and soul." She hurried out of the dining room without further remark. Miss Smith was more patient with black folk than with white. The sun was hanging just above the tallest trees of the swamp when Miss Taylor, weary with the day's work, climbed into the buggy beside Bless. They wheeled comfortably down the road, leaving the sombre swamp with its black green to the right and the heading toward the golden green of waving cotton fields. Miss Taylor lay back listlessly and drank the soft, warm air of the languorous spring. She thought of the golden sheen of the cotton and the cold March winds of New England, of her brother who apparently noted nothing of leaves and winds and seasons, and of the mighty Cresswells whom Miss Smith so evidently disliked. Suddenly she became aware of a long silence and the silence of the boy. "Bless," she began didactically. "Where are you from?" He glanced across at her and answered shortly, "Georgia, ma'am," and was silent. The girl tried again. "Georgia is a large state," tentatively. "Yes, ma'am." "Are you going back there when you finish?" "I don't know." "I think you ought to, and work for your people." "Yes, ma'am." She stopped, puzzled, and looked about. The old horse jogged lazily on, and Bless switched him unavailingly. Somehow she had missed the way today. The veil hung thick, sombre, impenetrable. Well, she had done her duty. And slowly she nestled back and watched the far-off green and golden radiance of the cotton. "Bless," she said impulsively, "shall I tell you of the golden fleece?" He glanced at her again. "Yes, please," he said. She settled herself almost luxuriously and began the story of Jason and the Argonauts. The boy remained silent, and when she had finished, he still sat silent, elbow and knee, absently flicking the jogging horse and staring ahead at the horizon. She looked at him doubtfully with some disappointment that his hearing had apparently shared so little of the joy for her telling. And too, there was mingled a vague sense of having lowered herself to too familiar fellowship with this boy. She straightened herself instinctively and thought of some remark that would restore proper relations. She had not found it before. He said slowly, "All yon is Jason's." "What?" she asked, puzzled. He pointed with one sweep of his long arm to the quivering mass of green gold foliage that swept from swamp to horizon. "All yon golden fleece is Jason's now," he repeated. "I thought it was Cresswell's," she said. "That's what I mean." She suddenly understood that the story had sunk deeply. "I'm glad to hear you say that," she said methodically. "For Jason was a brave adventurer." "I thought he was a thief." "Oh well, those were other times." The Cresswells are thieves now. Miss Taylor answered sharply. Bless, I am ashamed to hear you talk so of your neighbours simply because they are white. But Bless continued. This is the Black Sea, he said, pointing to the dull cabins that crouched here and there upon the earth, with a dark twinkling of their black folk darting out to see the strangers ride by. Despite herself, Miss Taylor caught the allegory and half whispered, Lo, the king himself, as a black man almost rose from the tangled earth at their side. He was tall and thin and sombre-hued, with a craven face and thick grey hair. Your servant's mistress, he said, with a sweeping bow, as he strode towards the swamp. Miss Taylor stopped by him, for he looked interesting, and might answer some of her brother's questions. He turned back and stood regarding her with sorrowful eyes and ugly mouth. Do you live about here? She asked. I've lived here 100 years, he answered. She did not believe it. He might be 70, 80, or even 90 indeed. There was about him that indefinable sense of age, some shadow of endless living, but 100 seemed absurd. You know the people pretty well, then? I knows them all. I knows most of them better than they know themselves. I knows a heap of things in this world and in the next. This is the great cotton country. They don't raise no cotton now to what they used to when old General Creswell first come from Carolina. Then it was a bale and a half to the acre on stalks that looked like young brushwood. That was cotton. You know the Creswells, then? Know them? I know them afore they were born. They are wealthy people. They rolls in money, and there's quality too. No shoddy upstairs them, but born to purple, lady, born to purple. Old General Creswell had niggers and acres no end back there in Carolina. He brung a part of them here, and here his son, the father of this Colonel Creswell, was born. The son, I knowed him well. He had 1,000 niggers and 10,000 acres afore the war. Were they kind to their slaves? Oh, yes, ma'am. They was careful of their niggers, and wouldn't let them drivers whip 'em much. And these Creswells today? Oh, they're quality, high blood folks. They's lost some land and niggers, but lordy, nothing can buy the Creswells. They naturally owns the world. Are they honest and kind? Oh, yes, ma'am. They's good white folks. Good white folk. Oh, yes, ma'am. Course you knows, white folks will be white folks. White folks will be white folks. Your servant, ma'am. And the swamp swallowed him. The boy's eyes followed him as he whipped up the horse. He's going to Elsvet's, he said. Who is he? We just call him Old Pappy. He's a preacher, and some folks say a conjure man too. And who is Elsvet? She lives in the swamp. She's a kind of witch, I reckon, like Medea. Yes. Only I don't know. And he grew thoughtful. The road turned now, and far away to the eastward rose the first straggling cabins of the town. Creeping toward them down the road rolled a dark, squat figure. It grew and spread slowly on the horizon until it became a fat, old black woman, hooded and aproned, with great round hips and massive bosom. Her face was heavy and homely until she looked up and lifted the drooping cheeks, and then kindly old eyes beamed on the young teacher as she curtsied and cried, "Good evening, honey. Good evening. You sure is pretty this evening." "Why, Aunt Rachel, how are you?" There was a genuine pleasure in the girl's tone. "Just tolerable, honey, bless the Lord. Rheumatiz is kind of bad, and Aunt Rachel ain't so young as she used to be." "And what brings you to town afoot this time of day?" The face fell again to dull care, and the old eyes crept away. She fumbled with her cane. "It's the boys again, honey," she returned solemnly. "These good boys. They's good of their old mammy, but they's high strung, and they gets fighting and drinking. And last Saturday night, they got took up again. I's been to Judge Gray. I used to tote to my knee, honey. I's been to him to plead him not to let them go to gang. 'Cause you see, honey," and she stroked the girl's sleeve as if pleading with her too, "you see, it done ruins a boy to put 'em on the gang." Miss Taylor tried hard to think of something comforting to say, but words seemed inadequate to cheer the old soul. But after a few moments they rode on, leaving the kind face again beaming and dimpling. And now the country town of Tombsville lifted itself above the cotton and corn, fringed with dirty, straggling cabins of black folk. The road swung past the iron watering trough, turning sharply, and after passing 2 or 3 pert cottages and a stately house, old and faded, open into the wide square. Here pulsed the very life and being of the land. Yonder, great bales of cotton, yellow-white in its soil sacking, piled in lofty, dusty mountains, lay listening for the train that, twice a day, ran out to the greater world. Round about, tied to the well-gnawed hitching rails, were rows of mules, mules with back cloths, mules with saddles, mules hitched to long wagons, buggies, and rickety jigs, mules munching golden ears of corn, and mules drooping their heads in sorrowful memory of better days. Beyond the cotton warehouse smoked the chimneys of the seed mill and the cotton gin. A red livery stable faced them, and all about 3 sides of the square ran stores, big stores, and small, wide-windowed, narrow stores. Some had old steps above the worn clay sidewalks, and some were flush with the ground. All had a general sense of dilapidation, save one, the largest and most imposing, a 3-story brick. This was Caldwell's Emporium, and here Bless stopped, and Miss Taylor entered. Mr. Caldwell himself hurried forward, and the whole store, clerks and customers stood at attention, for Miss Taylor was yet new to the county. She bought a few trifles and then approached her main business. "My brother wants some information about the county, Mr. Caldwell, and I am only a teacher and do not know much about conditions here." "Ah, where do you teach?" asked Mr. Caldwell. He was certain he knew the teachers of all the white schools in the county. Miss Taylor told him. He stiffened slightly, but perceptibly, like a man clicking the buckles of his ready armour, and 2 townswomen, who listened gradually, turned their backs, but remained near. Yes, Yes, he said with uncomfortable haste. Any information, of course. Miss Taylor got out her notes. The leading landowners, she began, sorting the notes searchingly. I should like to know something about them. Well, Colonel Cresswell is, of course, our greatest landlord, a high-bred gentleman of the old school. He and his son, a worthy successor to the name, hold some 50,000 acres. They may be considered representative types. Then Mr. Maxwell has 10,000 acres, and Mr. Tolliver 1,000. Miss Taylor wrote rapidly. And cotton? She asked. We raise considerable cotton, but not nearly what we ought to. Nigger labour is too worthless. Oh, the Negroes are not, then, very efficient. Efficient? Snorted Mr. Caldwell. At last she had broached a phase of the problem upon which he could dilate with fervour. They're the lowest down, honest, begging your pardon, good-for-nothing loafers you ever heard of. Why, we just have to carry them and care for them like children. Look yonder. He pointed across the square to the courthouse. It was an old square brick and stucco building, sombre and stilted and very dirty. Out of it filed a stream of men, some black and shackled, some white and swaggering and liberal with tobacco coat juice, some white and shaven and stiff. Court's just out, pursued Mr. Caldwell. And them niggers have just been sent to the gang. Young ones too. Educated, but good for nothing. They're all that way. Miss Taylor looked up a little puzzled and became aware of a battery of eyes and ears. Everybody seemed craning and listening, and she felt a sudden embarrassment and a sense of half-veiled hostility in the air. With one or two further perfunctory questions and a hasty expression of thanks, she escaped into the air. The whole square seemed loafing and lolling, the white world perched on stoops and chairs in doorways and windows, the black world filtering down from doorways to sidewalk and curb, the hot, dusty quadrangle stretched in dreary deadness towards the temple of the town. As if doing obedience to the courthouse. Down the courthouse steps the sheriff, with Winchester on shoulder, was bringing in the last prisoner, a curly-headed boy with golden face and big brown frightened eyes. It's one of the Dunn's boys, said Bless. He's drunk again, and they say he's been stealing. I expect he was hungry. And they wheeled out of the square. Miss Taylor was tired, and the hastily scribbled letter which she dropped into the post in passing was not as clearly expressed as she could wish. A great-voiced giant, brown and bearded, drove past them, roaring a hymn. He greeted Bless with a comprehensive wave of the hand. I guess Taylor has been paid off, said Bless. But Miss Taylor was too disgusted to answer. Further on they overtook a tall young yellow boy walking awkwardly beside a handsome, bold-faced girl. Two white men came riding by. One leered at the girl and she laughed back, while the yellow boy strode sullenly ahead. As the two white riders approached the buggy, one said to the other, Who's that nigger with? One of them nigger teachers. Well, they'll stop this darn riding around or they'll hear something. And they rode slowly by. Miss Taylor felt rather than heard their words, and she was uncomfortable. The sun fell fast. The long shadows of the swamp swept soft coolness on the red road. Then afar in front a curled cloud of white dust arose, and out of it came the sound of galloping horses. Join me for the next episode of Silver Fleece. Join me, Morel Bernard, for the next episode of Silver Fleece. Look out for the next video. See you then. Okay, bye.